We've stood at the front lines of law, leadership, and public service. From the courtroom to the classroom, Attorney Karen Jimeno brings sharp legal insight, academic excellence, and a voice that has guided national conversations. Attorney Mike Toledo, a seasoned public affairs strategist and legal mind with years in media, corporate leadership, and government reform. Together, they bring law to life with experience, integrity, and the courage to ask hard questions. Two minds shaped by the law. Two voices trusted in and out of the courtroom. This is Abogado.
Good evening. You're watching Abogado, where legal minds engage in thoughtful discussions on the country's most pressing issues. I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno. Each week, we bring you reasoned perspectives on legal questions that matter. No shouting, no spin, just intelligent dialogue rooted in law and public policy. Tonight's episode centers on a proposed national policy that could change the college journey for every Filipino student, one that involves service, duty, and citizenship. What exactly is being proposed? Let's take a closer look.
Each June, we honor the courage of those who fought for our nation's freedom. Today, the call is different, but no less important. A proposed program seeks to shape the next generation through structured training in civic duty, emergency readiness, and community involvement. Supporters believe it fosters unity, responsibility, and pride in being Filipino. Skeptics, however, warn of unintended costs. Is this truly a path toward empowerment or a step back from individual choice? Will this strengthen nationhood or place new burdens on the youth? On this day, when we remember the price of liberty, we explore a timely question. Should national citizen service training be mandatory for college students?
In favor of the proposition is Attorney Siegfred Bueno Mison, a West Point graduate, lawyer, former soldier, and corporate executive. He has served in the Philippine Army, Bureau of Immigration, and several top organizations. He is also a book author, professor, and inspirational speaker, a true advocate of service-driven leadership. Representing the position against mandatory NSCT is labor lawyer and workers' rights advocate, Attorney Sonny Matula. A graduate of Mindanao State University and Manuel L. Quezon University, he has served in key public roles and now leads the Federation of Free Workers and Nagkaisa Labor Coalition, championing labor rights and social justice. Let's look at the structure that will guide tonight's exchange.
We begin with the opening statements. First, the speaker supporting the proposition presents their position in a focused 2-minute statement. Then, the speaker challenging the proposition offers their perspective, also within 2 minutes. The conversation then unfolds through 2 key subtopics. For each subtopic, the guest supporting the proposition presents their insights for 2 minutes, followed by a 2-minute perspective from the guest challenging the proposition. After both perspectives have been presented, we move into the open exchange, a 6-minute free-flowing discussion where both guests ask questions, share points, and respond to each other directly. Once both subtopics have been explored, we proceed to closing reflections where each guest is given 2 minutes to summarize their key messages. And finally, the hosts step in with their own questions. In this 6-minute segment, the guests respond, clarify, and deepen the discussion, ensuring no critical point is left unexplored.
We begin with opening statements. The question, should NSCT be mandatory for college students? Attorney Mison, you have 2 minutes.
Yes. Thank you, Atty. Karen, for having me. The answer is yes, we should. Why? Because, first, college students are generally, anything that is forced is not good. Growing up, I was asked by my father to eat ampalaya. I did not want it, but he knew that it was good for me. Perhaps that was the reason why maybe I am healthier than my other classmates because of that ampalaya. Fast forward, there are some things that the state should know and ought to know what's best for its citizenry. And this is one of them. Make it mandatory. The problem is, Attorney Karen, is I think it's more on the implementation. When I read the law and listened to some deliberations, it has a noble goal. So it really depends on how it will be implemented, and at the same time, try to have that different image. Because before, when we say mandatory something else in college, it presupposes purely military training. This law that I have seen seems to be different from most.
Okay, very well said. And you still have extra time left. So very concise argument. Thank you, Attorney Mison. Let's go to Attorney Matula. Your opening statement, 2 minutes.
Freedom can be exercised if there are many options. If the law will impose a mandatory, for example, military service, then the person or the students have no option. In the present law, the student has 3 options. He can go to military service training, he can go to a literacy service program, and he can go to community welfare training program. So he has or she has 3 options. That's a good, he has good options, and he can or she can exercise his freedom of choice.
Okay. Also very concise argument. Thank you so much. I like your opening statements, direct to the point. Let's now dive into the first subtopic. Can NSCT enhance youth development, discipline, and national readiness? Is this new model more inclusive than ROTC? Can it help prepare the youth for civic engagement, community building, or even disaster response? Attorney Mison, your perspective, you have 2 minutes.
My perspective, Attorney Karen, yes, the way the law is written now, it presents that holistic approach that you hit 3 birds, that civic duty, that military service if necessary, and at the same time that community engagement. In such a way that, yes, we have to have all of those 3 mandatorily, because given the options that were already given to the free college student, I'm not sure about the statistics, but in all likelihood, based on my informal survey, there is really a steady decline of those going or opting for that reservist training. That's why, to me, it is a matter of rebranding that entire program, that it is not a purely military service thing. One thing I like about the law, Attorney Karen, is that it's not really run by military people. There's that component of the CHED, which is something that ROTC did not have. And there are also other organizations that were already tapped. So it's not a purely military exercise. Again, going back to that perception that every time we talk about ROTC, sundalo ito. But it's not about sundalo. It's just about having that value of patriotism and good citizenship. Now, for the most part, they will say, oh, it's all military. And I would say a large part of military personnel, retired active, who somehow experience some kind of training, there's so much, very much discipline. The love of country will always be there because they experience so much hardship. So there were some stakes already invested. That's why they say, oh, military people, they have greater love for country. But that is not so.
Okay.
It's really a matter of putting your heart into serving the country in so many ways,
Okay,
and not
so-
just being a soldier.
So you've finished your time, Attorney Mison, but I think you've made your point there. It's not just purely military training, but it also instills discipline and love of country. I want to hear now the other side. Attorney Matula, why are you opposed to this when it comes to this aspect of youth development, discipline, and national readiness? Why are you still opposing the NCST?
My opposition is on the part of its emphasis on military service. We have to know that in the Declaration of Principles and Policy of our Constitution, under Article 2, Section 2, the Philippines renounces war as an instrument of public policy and adopt the international principle of law as part of the law of the land. And of course, we adhere to the policy of peace, equality, justice, friendship, and cooperation with other nations. So my objection with the present law is the emphasis on the military service. So you can instill discipline and love of country in community welfare service. You can instill discipline and love of country in the literacy services. And of course, I do not object that military training can instill discipline and love of country, but we should not downgrade the other part because we do not emphasize the military training alone as the forum or instrument to instill love of country and patriotism or service to our people.
Okay. Well, now we'll have a chance to have a more open exchange. So in this section, we'll have free time for both of you to deliver your exchanges and questions for each other so that you can challenge each other's points and bring in related insights. So you'll have 6 minutes for this. Anyone wants to start? Question?
There's no argument, Attorney Sonny. We agree that there has to be some kind of military component.
Yes,
right?
of course.
And to me, that is just one of the many programs that this new NCST law is trying to bring. So, again, I really do not understand why there will be some kind of opposition when it is not solely military. There's civic duty, there's community, there's disaster responsiveness, there's volunteerism, there's so many. And like I said, Attorney Karen, it really depends on the implementation. And I like the way the law is crafted now because CHED is at the forefront. Before, when you say ROTC, it's really the DND. It's the armed forces based in using the reserve command. They are the ones really running the show in each school. This time around, it appears, based again on the law, it's the CHED. So,
Attorney Sonny, do you have anything to respond to that?
Yes, my problem is at least in the discussion, in the deliberation of this law, the emphasis on the compulsory military service. And that is my concern in this particular law. And I'm also confused with this particular law because when you look at Section 3, Paragraph K, if I remember it well, that those who are enlisted in the National Reserve, some sort of a corps, they cannot be part also or they cannot be used as combatant. No? I think there's some confusion with this law. Mm-hmm. And with respect to my experience as with, for example, the students being enrolled in the military training, I have a bad experience with the present administrative management of this of the reserve force, because when you are a graduate of, for example, military training, you have a hard time looking at your record. We have a number of the students who already graduated and they wanted to be in the reserve force, but they could not find their serial number, their records in their trainings, in their office.
But Attorney Sonny, does that go into an argument against making NCST mandatory? That seems to be an administrative problem.
Yes, because if you make that mandatory, there will be a number of people that will be covered. And with the present setup, even though it's optional, may problema na tayo sa administrative matters. How much more kung
like I said,
Attorney
like I said, Attorney Karen, there's no, I think, dispute here. It's really a matter of implementation. Every time you introduce something new, there will be some birth pains. So I understand his apprehension, Attorney Sonny, that it can be more of a nightmare given that the current setup has some administrative concerns already. But that's part of introducing something new, hopefully something better. What I really like about this, Attorney Karen, is really more on that component of patriotism. And patriotism is not taught by just marching around under the sun or shooting your rifle or making that salute and other military. There are so many others. That's why I'm excited to see how CHED and the other agencies tasked to formulate that curriculum, how it will look like.
So I personally went through CTC when I was in high school. And you're right, it was a lot of just marching and drills. And I don't feel that it developed patriotism in us. Paano pagkakaroon in this case, do you think, if CHED is involved? Will they have sit-down classes on patriotism? And as someone who graduated from West Point, what type of training instills patriotism?
Oh, it's just knowing the history of your country, deeper than what is taught already in the grade school or high school level. But at the same time, you know how, let's say, certain schools kind of like indoctrinate their students na pag Ateneo wear blue, LaSalle wear green. At the onset, we are red, white, and blue because we are Filipinos. So that those kinds of basic ingredients in trying to have that sense of belongingness and identity, you can do that perhaps in some kind of workshop, classroom instruction, whatever that is. And it should not be just military training.
Well, Attorney Sonny, I'm curious because you were emphasizing earlier that you're against this, especially the military training focus of NCST, if it's mandatory. What's wrong with that, with military training? Do you think that it's not effective to develop patriotism? Because I've seen countries that have mandatory military training like Israel, and the citizens are very patriotic.
My concern is that with the present setup, we need to focus on. For example, if you opt for military service, then you focus on military service. If you opt for literacy service, then go. Then if it's community welfare, you go on that. And you have option. If you are, for example, personally, you do not like to be in the military, then you have the option not to pursue the military part of it. And if for religious reason, you are not forced to go to military. So or other reason, then you can have the option.
So you want
without
option.
Without being compelled to go on all these three.
Okay, I can already imagine the different parenting styles. Kay Attorney Sig, kailangan kumain ka ang palaya. Kay Attorney Sonny, you have the option. Okay. Well, now let's go to the next subtopic. How can NCST be implemented fairly? Could it unintentionally replicate past abuses under ROTC? Might it violate student rights? What about economic freedom, regional access, or the financial burden on students? So, ang daming consideration. So, Attorney Mison, on these points, Can you give your argument why NCST should be mandatory? 2 minutes.
Yes. Again, I am not really pushing and saying that this will be a foolproof solution to our current disciplinary constraints or concerns. And it can potentially replicate what really happened to those previous programs that were really solely based on military courses, military discipline, run by military organizations. I'm not for it. What I'm for is the current setup, which is NCST. And, you know, I like the way it was branded, National Citizen Service Training. It's about citizenship. And being a good citizen, you need to have discipline. And for the most part, Attorney Karen, in all the organizations in the world, which do you think is the most disciplined? Military. That's why there has to be that military component. But that's not the sole thing that this NCSD wants to achieve. It also wants to achieve that kind of volunteerism and that preparedness in terms of civic duty, responding to disasters, and all that. So it can potentially replicate, but hopefully not with the current wordings of the law. Hopefully, it really depends on the output of that entity that was tasked to come up with that curriculum.
So you're really in favor of the way it's designed right now. It's really well-rounded.
Yes, and hopefully they can come up with that curriculum. Again, the devil is in the details. Hopefully, it will really achieve what it wanted to achieve based on the law itself.
Okay. Attorney Sonny, your thoughts?
Yeah, there are a number of countries who are adopting compulsory military service. For example, Indonesia. But they're not following it because of their population. So, hindi rin nasusunod. For example, Brazil, mayroong compulsory din yan. Pero dahil maraming volunteers, ay hindi rin na-implement as compulsory. So, palagay ko, sa Pilipinas, kung military service ang pag-usapan, marami tayong volunteers. Kaya palagay ko, hindi na kinakailangan i-compulsory yan.
So, when it comes to, now we're gonna open our floor for open exchange. And when it comes to implementation, kanina si Attorney Sig, who's in favor of NCSTs,
Yes.
is saying that the devil is in the details, so it really depends how they implement it. But for Attorney Sonny, you think kaya ba itong ma-implement fairly? Considering that you raise even yung past experience natin, yung administrative, very difficult, yung records. So, for either side, do you have questions that you want to ask each other?
I mean, you should take out the argument, Attorney Sonny, from a purely military perspective. Because that's not what the law is saying now. It's a mixture of all of these things that you say currently as optional. They just lumped it into one. So it's not a purely military thing. So we cannot argue on the basis of making it mandatory militarily. No, we're making it mandatory because of having that desire to have good citizens. And for you to have good citizens, you really need to have discipline. You need to have patriotism, something that is not as visible right now in terms of our youth. That's why you start them young. Fine, we can talk about Israel, Singapore, Korea, about those mandatory, not only training, but service. We don't want that. That's not what the law is saying. What the law is just saying, that let's make it mandatory for us to have that love for country. And military training is just one of the many.
Any questions, Attorney Sonny?
Yun ang kuhan ko kasi marami din sa ating mga kabataan na ayaw nga mag-military for personal reason, for religious reasons, or other reasons. No? Kaya huwag nating pilitin. Palagay ko naman the strongest thing in this world is the volunteer. No? Those who volunteer, palagay ko yun ang pinakamalakas, hindi yung kinocompel yung mga tao. So yung, for example, yung aking anak ay, wala akong objection sa military service. Yung aking anak pina-ROTC ko nga At gusto ko rin siya mag-advance ROTC. Pero hanggang basic lang siya, kaya ayaw niya mag-compulsory. So, okay lang yon. Yung isang anak ko, hindi siya nag-ROTC. So, okay lang yon. May option siya. So, mas maganda yung ganoon kaysa parang pinipilit yung tao.
And, sir, and that's exactly what the law says. There's an option for you to take advanced ROTC. If you really want to take that sole military route, take that optional 4-year ROTC route and then be part of the AFP. But for the basic, the first 2 years, or I don't know how many number of units required, then it's not only military, Attorney Karen, so many. That's why it really depends on how the final curriculum will look like.
Well, I'm curious because just going to the issue of implementation, do you think that our government is capable of implementing this equally and fairly, especially when it comes to quality? And then the financial burden on families, because the way it would be designed for public schools and private schools in different regions, is that something that you think can be done on a practical level?
Palagay ko madadagdagan kasi ang gastos eh. Kasi sa kasalukuyan, the military training is only for 2 semesters. Itong dito sa, including yung, siyempre, yung literacy at community welfare. So, naging, sa kasalukuyan, naging 4 semesters. So, nadagdagan ng 2 semesters yung ating trainings. Tapos, isa pa dyan, may problema tayo dun sa senior high schools eh. Sa senior high school kasi below 18 pa yung mga bata roon. So baka may problema tayo doon sa ating commitment sa UN Convention against yung sa child, no? Sa children. So
What
kasi
UN
prohibited,
Convention specifically, what provision there are you worried about?
yung pag-engage into military involvement sa mga batang below 18-year-old.
What was your response to that, Attorney Sig?
Definitely, Attorney Karen, there will be some strain in the budget because this will be something entirely new. But to me, if you want to really invest in your country, invest in your people. So no matter how, let's say, how big the difference is implementing a full-on NCST versus an optional NSTP, then I think it's a small price to pay in exchange for a patriotic set of people who will really love their country and not just defend it militarily. Again, you just have to take out that notion that this is a military training. It is not. The way it is crafted, it is not. So that's why I said earlier, a case of rebranding, you have to convince whoever is the proponent and the one who will implement this, they have a challenge to market the product, so to speak.
And change that perception, yung stereotype
Yes,
natin, no? Na
yes.
it's CAT, it's ROTC, na marcha ka lang na marcha.
Yes.
Yeah. But this will be mandatory even for private schools
Yes, it says there.
in the law. And
Yes.
what about international schools? A lot of Filipinos have started going to international schools as well.
That I do not know. There's a provision about foreign students, but for international schools, I am not so aware of that particular provision. But basically, I'm just looking more at the bigger picture. You know, if you can train 90% of the Filipinos because there are some, let's say, religious or whatever objections to engage in this one. But if you can capture that 90%, I should be happy. If a Singaporean, a Korean is proud to be a Korean and a Singaporean because of their military service, maybe our Filipinos can be prouder to be Filipinos because of this program.
Well, we have 12 seconds left. I'm giving you a chance, Attorney Sonny, to end this discussion with your point.
Yung aming tingin dito ay yung kasalukuyang batas kasi ay yung option yung NSTP ay siyempre dadaan lahat yan. Yung option ay 3. So mamili ka. But with the present with the proposal yung 3 ay dadaanan mo. So parang wala kang escape doon sa military kung ayaw mo maging military, di ba?
Okay,
Pero
so
wala
talagang
kang
freedom.
objection na maging military kasi
So freedom of choice talaga is very important for you, Attorney Sonny. Okay, we'll pause briefly. When we return, our guests share their final reflections and answer closing questions. Stay with us. This is Abogado. Welcome back to Abogado. Tonight's proposition: should National Citizen Service training be mandatory for college students? We've heard arguments on its potential to promote service and unity from Attorney Siegfred Mison, and on the risk to academic freedom and equitable access from Attorney Sonny Matula. It's now time for our guest closing reflections. Attorney Mison, you have 2 minutes.
There are some things that should not be forced upon us, but there are some things that should be. And I think this is one, given our current set of circumstances where I would say the Filipino pride is not there as compared to 30, 40, 50 years ago. Something is wrong. And NCST, the way it is crafted now as a bill and soon to be a law, I think addresses that issue. And I think the state, acting as parents patriae, is really forcing this on its citizens, subject to certain limited exceptions, because the state thinks that it is good for them. Same way when I was raised by my father, I need to do something, I was forced to do something, to the point of going to the military. Not, I would say, forcibly, but with very strong encouragement. What good did it do to me? I grew up as a disciplined, responsible member of society. So I guess the state will always have that prerogative. And in this given time of having that waning sense of patriotism, I think we really need something like this to be mandatory.
Okay, thank you so much, Attorney Mison. Attorney Sonny, that's coming from the perspective of a West Point graduate and a lawyer as well.
Oo.
What about you? Closing remarks.
Sa punto de vista ng dito nag-aral sa Pilipinas, palagay ko yung kung may tatlong opsyon ka, mas maganda yun kaysa lahat ipadaanan sa iyo. No? Palagay ko naman ang disiplina at pagmamahal sa bansa ay pwede mo makuha doon sa saan man doon sa tatlo. Pangalawa po ay may dagdag na gastos. So magiging yung isang taon ay gagawing 2 semester, ay magiging 2 taon, 4 na semester. Gagastos yan. At syempre, yung of course, doon sa mga state universities and colleges, libre yan. Pero yung mga nag-aaral sa mga pribado, ay may tuition yan. May tuition fee sa batas, ay although kalahati nga ng mga subject, pero ang cost doon, pero babayad ka pa rin ng tuition kung nasa private school ka. Sa palagay ko ay mas maganda yung tatlong opsyon. Kung gusto mo talagang military, ay doon ka natututok. Kung gusto mong literacy, doon ka tututok. At syempre, kung gusto mong community service, may option ka na hindi ka nakukumpil na tanggapin lahat yung tatlo.
Okay. Thank you so much, Attorney Sonny. So, sa'yo yung consideration din yung practical, no? Yung cost.
Yung practicality.
Yeah. So,
at saka administrative feasibility siguro kung marami.
Yeah, talagang yung administrative is an issue because of the experience we've had with the past ROTC. Nahanap na ba yung mga records?
Ay,
Kung gusto mo mag-reserve, wala pa rin.
Hindi lang isa o dalawa yung mga gustong mag-reservice na nag-training ulit dahil hindi nakita yung ROTC record nila.
Okay, so wala na bang pag-asa palang mahanap yan?
Palagay ko. Kaya nag-training na sila ulit. Doble tuloy.
Oh. Well, I have one final question for each of our guests. So, with respect to this issue that we're facing as a country, we've seen geopolitically that there is this increasing tension with China with respect to the West Philippine Sea. And then we've also been topping the charts for the most disaster risk-prone country. So given the current state of this bill, the NCST, where it does give you military training, and also includes disaster preparedness, what do you think is the effectivity? Should this be passed as a law, yung mandatory NCST? Do you think it will address those issues of geopolitical risks to our country and also disaster preparedness? Who wants to go first?
Definitely, Attorney Karen. The way it is worded now, definitely it will, with the proper implementation. So it's really a challenge for CHED, DND, and the other government agencies tasked to formulate that curriculum and to implement the program. But the way it is designed, the way I've seen the law, it really has potential.
And you're
So-
optimistic na kakayanin with the implementation.
Well, it really depends on the leader. It really depends on whoever is the point person there. I hope he will have that, genuine love for country, that this is just not a program, one of the many programs that CHED has to formulate, but it's something bigger that will address not only a small piece of the population, but it's really for the entire population as well.
Well, Attorney Sonny, since you've always argued for optionality, with
Yeah.
respect to those two scenarios that we have right now, geopolitical risk and being highly disaster risk prone.
Kung mapaliwanag yun at maintindihan ng ating mga kabataan, yung military option na binibigay ng kasalukuyang batas, palagay ko maraming magbo-volunteer. No? Halimbawa doon sa Cotabato, may mga nagre-recruit yung Philippine Army. Sobra-sobra pa nga, hindi ma-accommodate lahat yung nag-a-apply no? Sa Philippine Army. Dito sa community welfare, yung sa panahon ng mga disaster, ay ma-address din yan ang kasalukuyang batas. So palagay ko ay hindi na kinakailangan yung bagong batas na magpapahaba ng mga semester, dagdagan, at siyempre may gastos yan.
Ganun po ba yung design ngayon? Hahaba ang semester?
Oo, kasi sa kasalukuyan ay 2 semesters lamang yung basic military option. At yung community welfare din, 2 semester lang at hindi doon sa proposal ay maging 4 na yan. No?
The semester will be intact, except that there will be additional hours.
Okay. So yun yung
And that
sinasabi
was
po kanina.
the financial burden of having additional hours during the school week.
Especially if you have working students. Students yung mga college students that have to support themselves or support their family, mababawasan yung ability nila na magtrabaho.
But that's exactly what you need, some kind of sacrifice for love of country.
Well, Attorney Sonny, any final words on that note?
Wala akong objection sa military training, wala akong objection sa community welfare at saka sa literacy. So siguro ang gusto kong mangyayari ay huwag na nating pasabugin na lahat ito dadaanan. So isa lang, okay na sa akin. So pumili yung estudyante at sa kasalukuyang batas, may option sila.
Okay. Thank you so much. And with that, we were able to hear both sides with 3 minutes left on our time. Thank you so much, Attorney Siegfred Mison and Attorney Sonny Matula, for your compelling insights and respectful exchange. As we consider proposals like NCST, the bigger questions remain. What do we ask of the next generation? And how do we prepare them for the future? In law, in service, and in life. That's the kind of conversation we aim to encourage. Thoughtful, informed, and grounded in law and public purpose. This is Abogado. Good night.